Live from Kakariko Village. Broadcast throughout the Retroverse, transmitted to the real world via a maze of wires connecting a Super Nintendo to a Wii, to a Wi-Fi network, and finally to the Internet. The TechnoFunkBoy presents the Retro Zoo Super Show. Now here are your hosts, Kai and Steven.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the Retro Zoo Super Show, and I am, like last week, a little bit off kilter because I'm in the wrong chair.
Yep.
Already?
Yeah, already. Because what makes you feel ill at ease? Like sitting in the wrong chair? A diminished seventh chord. And there it is. It just makes you feel uncomfortable, doesn't it?
Oh, goodness, what are we doing? I am Kai. We are joined by our special guest, who's becoming less special as time goes on.
Every time I visit, the visits get a little bit less special.
Dan Gilak, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
I do like mentioning your podcast while you're here.
Yeah, thanks.
Are we supposed to do that right now? Because y'all aren't working on it.
We are, though. We're behind the scenes working on it. What he is referring to is my wife and I run a podcast called Stories for the Road. We read short stories. We are currently on a quote-unquote hiatus, which means that we're being extraordinarily lazy, and we haven't put out an episode for a little while. But we have several in the works, and our dear host here likes, in our private conversations, loves to give me a really hard time about how infrequent our podcast releases an episode. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
it just as a little bit of background, because I think this is hilarious, is that we have behind the scenes discussions about podcasting and how to grow an audience.
Sure.
And what's the big advice you always give me?
You got to put an episode out every single week. That's like number one. It is the number one rule. It's like you got to keep pumping out quality content. And if you can't pump out quality content, you got to pump out content. So, yeah.
Oh, too much fun. So
half of my production team is not on board with my advice, but that's okay. I'm all right with that.
Oh, well, thank you again for joining us. For those who don't know, Dan, who did not hear our previous episodes with you when we were tackling the music of Symphony of the Night.
Yep.
Which y'all should have listened to already. Goodness. But you are a professor of music at University of Houston.
Yep, that's right.
I almost said Houston Baptist, which is not at all right, but in the same town.
They're both schools.
They're
both in Houston.
They're close.
Yeah, University of Houston. That's right. Yeah, I teach saxophone there.
Very good. So I call on him to explain things that I don't understand. And today we are debuting an EP that the TechnoFunkBoy has released based on Dragon Warrior music. And despite spending an inordinate amount of time arranging these songs and performing them, I don't understand them.
Well, there's a lot in there that's pretty complicated. I mean, this is the more you get into this, the stuff that they wrote for this game is really quite brilliant. I mean, it's clever.
Yeah,
it's not typical writing.
Right. Yeah, and so we are going to be digging into the Dragon Warrior soundtrack, and while we are going, letting you hear a little bit about the songs that the TechnoFunkBoy did put together for this. Those songs are available to download for free. And to do that, you just need to go to technofunkboy.com and sign up for our email newsletter, and you will get a prompt email confirming your email address and giving you the MP3s to hold forever and ever.
To cherish.
Exactly.
As long as you both shall live. Which, being an MP3, is a pretty long time.
Yes.
So you're stuck with it. You download it, it's there with you forever.
It can never truly be deleted, unless you delete it.
Well, there is that.
So, oh goodness. So, okay. So just a couple of things out of the way. The show notes for today, if you want to, we'll put up the tracks that we're listening to. We're going to listen to both the tracks from the game itself and the remixed versions and talk about them some. So you'll get a listing of all the tracks there, as well as some other fun stuff at technofunkboy.com/38. I think that's right. Yes. 38 for episode 38. Do you know how hard it is to keep track of episode numbers?
Well, they move up by one, so you should just write it down and put it on your desk.
And sometimes very frequently.
Yeah, you just get a little piece of paper, man. Just keep a running tally.
Well, once you get so many ticky marks, it's actually kind of
it's hard to read. I got to do some math. Right. Let me get on my abacus.
Oh goodness. So, all right. So a little bit of background.
Yeah.
So, this is, of course, Dragon Warrior, the classic NES game that really did invent the JRPG genre. We've been talking about it for several weeks. You do not need to listen to those episodes to keep up with us here. But we actually had a lot of fun in this series with Dragon Warrior, and we're kind of gonna miss it. But the composer of the game is Koichi Sugiyama. It's close.
I think so.
I appreciate the reassurance.
Got your back.
So he is. He has, of course, having composed Dragon Warrior itself is one of the very, very earliest games on the Famicom system. That was one of his first, and he's been associated with the Dragon Quest series ever since, and that's mostly what we would know him for.
Okay.
I think the music specifically from this game is so iconic that this is kind of his World 1-1 theme. The overworld that just is, if you played the game, it's so instantly recognizable.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of interesting things about this that I really didn't notice until we started digging into it. The sound system for the NES had 3 sound channels, and then like the sound effects channel that a lot of games use for drums.
Right.
And they were two square waves and a triangle wave, I think.
That sounds right to me. This is a little outside of my purview.
I'm looking at you like this is.
I know a little bit about this. I mean, this is where it gets a little wonky because, first of all, this is so early. This game itself is so early that there isn't much that's been habitually established by video game composers at this point.
Right.
So there aren't trends. They can't look back and what do we do for the last 15 games? They're kind of starting new, and so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and especially when you are creating a genre, which is exactly
what happens
what's
here.
Going on here, is that they have not done a game like this before. This is very early, and so I think a lot of the things that the composer's doing in this game is reflective of them not really having that much confidence in the system itself.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, when I look at the tunes that we're going to talk about, the first thing that I noticed when I got the sheet music in front of me was the incredible simplicity of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's 2 lines of music.
Right.
You were saying that there's 3 channels
There's 3
usually
channels.
Use, but
but they only use two of them.
They're only using two, right?
And the exceptions are, and there are some, like a couple of note exceptions here and there, but the two exceptions are the opening credits and the ending credits. And I was actually, when we interviewed with McGrew a couple of weeks ago, he suggested kind of off air when we were chatting about this that, you know, they probably just were not confident when you're playing the game how that was going to interact with the three channels and were the sound effects going to mess things up, and so just decided to only use three channels when you were not playing the game.
Yeah. They didn't want to overload the system.
Right, exactly. But that, you know, that's putting, you know, NES music is always putting the composer in a little tiny box.
Absolutely.
And this is putting him in even a smaller box.
Yeah.
And what he comes up with in that tiny, tiny little box is actually pretty darn impressive.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, you've got two lines of music, which means that you can't play a lot of chords. You can't play harmonies, really. I mean, you can play two notes at the same time, but you can't play a full, like, three-note chord. You couldn't play that at the same time. You could play, but you couldn't play all at the same time.
Right.
Yeah. So, that's limiting right there. Also, these tunes are like 6 to 8 measures long.
Yeah, and that's the other box.
They're really small.
I'm really curious if they were concerned about memory
space,
memory space, because you know NES a lot of times could not handle very long long tunes in their loops. Their loops tended to be very short, but these are shorter than the average bear.
These are super short, and I never realized it. I mean, I recently played the game, and I didn't realize that this was like literally these loops are less than 10 seconds long.
Right. And I think that's actually a testament, and I'm going to say specifically to the overworld theme.
Yeah. Because
you spend a ton of time listening to the overworld theme in this game, and you know he's got to be able to loop just a very, very, very short piece of music that is not going to drive you crazy, 6-7 hours later.
Right.
Which actually is darn impressive. And I think that's probably a good time to play some overworld theme.
Yeah, let's hear it.
All right. All right, so on the technical side, and this is cool that you noticed this too, because we both actually noticed this individually, is this sounds different than the normal NES tune, and there's a really good reason for it. Normally NES tunes use the triangle wave as the bass part,
right,
and the square wave as melody and harmony.
Yeah,
and he flips them.
Yeah. So you've got, now it's weird again because like we were saying earlier, if this is early enough, there haven't been really habits or trends established. So I think they were just messing around. They're like, hey, I kind of like this sound all the way up here in the melody.
Yeah.
Whereas later on, composers are like, you know what, it works a lot better in the bass. And so they do that. So this is a bit of an outlier.
Right. But but he's also composing, a very different style than honestly, even Zelda.
Yeah.
He's really trying to get what we in the modern world would think of as much more medieval.
Yeah, it's got this Renaissance-y sort of feel.
Yeah.
And like he does a bunch of things that help that out. Like one is the sound. So you've got this sort of an oboe, sort of early instrument lutish sort of sound that's associated with this medieval Renaissance music. So he's got that triangle wave sound up at the top. The other is, if we want to go more technical, in the harmonies that he uses, or implies rather, he's using what's called mode mixture, which is when he's in one key, but he'll play the minor chord and the major chord in the same tune. Yeah. So like at one point he plays a minor, but in another place he'll play a major.
Yep.
And it's only a few bars later. And so he's like switching from a D minor to a D major, which happened a lot of time in Renaissance music.
Yeah, and it's something that me listening to this stuff for the first time at 10 years old or however old I was.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, he's using mode mixture.
Right.
But it makes a very distinct flavor.
It does.
To the song itself. Now you were pointing out to me, and that, I kind of glossed over, even as I was arranging this, is that in what we've been calling the left hand, the chords in the background, he's playing them very staccato.
Yes.
And I really, thinking about it, I really do think he's trying to kind of simulate, kind of a medieval harp or some sort of plucked string instrument.
Yeah, plucking of a lute or something like that. Yeah, yeah.
And just for the people who have no idea what we're talking about.
Right.
Staccato notes are very, very short. You pull off of them right away.
Actually, this sound is terrible for that.
Yeah, I know. I was about to say.
I need to change the synth sound.
Right. The knob to your left. That'll work.
All right. Here's a staccato sound. Versus that actually doesn't. Man, synths are hard to play.
You can only do one thing with one sound.
All right, here we go. This is a staccato sound. Man, this is the worst episode ever.
And we're out of time.
Yeah, really. A lot of space between notes.
Yeah.
Short and separate.
Right. Yeah. In the TechnoFunkBoy version, I did not do that in that part.
Yeah.
And
that was only something that I noticed when I was like looking at the music and I was going back and forth between the new version, the remix that you'd put together, and the original version.
Right. And I did not do that. I didn't do it like intentionally. I like the way it sounded with longer notes.
Yeah.
But I think it's because I'm doing it with the bass in that song. And we're going to get to the song itself.
Sure.
But the bass line is a lot of staccato notes in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't until I really started looking at the sheet music to start arranging it for us that, I started realizing, hey, this isn't like, 1-4-5.
Right. Right. Yeah, these chords are all over the place. I mean, it's like the normal chord vocabulary that you'd use for most songs in Western music. And by that, I mean, like, if you're talking about Mozart or Bach or like, Louis Louis or like whatever pop music is playing right now, normally consists of
Louis Louis. That's up to date, man.
It is.
You're on the cutting edge.
This is Louis Louis on the separation synth, number 78, for those of you keeping track. No, like, normally, most of the music, and I'm talking about like 98% of the music that you hear in regular life is built out of chords that you get from like a major or minor scale. So they take the notes that exist in those scale, they stack them in ways that are predictable, and they get these chords, and that's how they pull it up.
Yeah.
A lot of these, now, even more so in the next two tunes that we're going to talk about,
right,
he throws that rule just way out the window.
Yeah.
Just way out the window. Like, he's not using these chords, like, at all.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned mode mixture, having a very Renaissance-y, feel to that. Is, especially in this song, and of the three songs we're dealing with, this is clearly kind of the Renaissance tune
definitely.
Of it.
Yeah.
And so, is this structure, something that we would find?
Yeah, specifically that motive, the motive on the bottom is called Alberti bass. An Alberti bass line. That's a really typical thing. Mozart used this all over the place. So Mozart would have been later than Renaissance, but, it still, calls up this idea of an ancient thought. So some of it is reminiscent of the way that Bach wrote as well. And so, he's using recognizable music composition techniques from classical music.
Yeah.
So definitely he's informed. This wasn't a guy who just found a keyboard and started piddling around. Like, he knew what he was doing. He understood, like, traditional music and was writing video game music using his knowledge.
Yeah, and actually kind of going through his history, he, before video games, he was composing for everything.
Okay.
Television commercials, pop artists.
Oh, cool.
Movies, musicals.
Yeah.
And so, he had been working in music for, goodness, at least 20 years before.
Okay.
Before Dragon Quest.
Yeah, this makof sense. I mean, It makes sense. It's obvious based on the way he's writing, you're not dealing with an amateur.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, kind of going forward into the TechnoFunkBoys version.
Yeah.
Is, the one thing that we had to tackle with all of these that are consistent throughout is, how do you take a 20-second song?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Okay. Just to sort of bring it back to what we were saying a second ago. Part of what's so clever about this is that literally the limitations make it impossible to do, like, every note that the guy is choosing is very, very thoughtful.
Yeah.
I mean, these tunes are like 8 seconds long.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, how do you turn that into a 5-minute tune? I don't know.
And one of the things that, that we had to do is kind of, strip it apart into some chords, kind of find a common thread throughout them, and let those chords kind of sing for a while before the melody comes in.
Yeah.
And then, using the different elements that we were putting in and taking out to move the song rather than a changing melody to. All right. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but let's hear it first.
All right. So, one of the things that happens here is that because, as we were saying, you could not play chords, as in multiple notes, at the same time in the original version of it.
Mm-hmm.
What they did instead of playing those chords is they would do what's called arpeggios.
Right.
And they would just play the notes from the chord one at a time. And so you get the effect of what's called implied harmony. You play all the notes in the chord, and your brain goes, oh, wait, I hear all these notes, and I'm going to assemble them myself. So they're not all playing at the same time, but I hear a D minor chord.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what you did is you took all this implied harmony, you took all the chords that it basically represented, and you just grooved on that for a while. You played those chords and sort of established this sort of environment, this ambiance.
Right.
So, which I kind of wonder if they would have done if they had the technology to play more than 2 notes at a time, you know?
Oh, I'm sure it does. Cause you see constantly as these NES composers move to the Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
Is they take a full advantage of the string sound.
Oh yeah, right.
And to just lay down some chords in the background.
Right.
And so, I'm actually, in a lot of things, I'm a big fan of putting those kind of limitations just so you figure out a way to get around them.
You know, it's crazy. Like Bach's, the Bach 2-part inventions are kind of written very, very similarly to the way that this is written. Not exactly, but it's 2 melody lines that you play on a piano, and they overlap each other, like in terms of notes. So, like some of these tunes, like the melody line and the bass line are actually like right next to each other. It's sort of like crashing into each other sometimes. The bass line might be a little higher than the melody line in the Dragon Warrior soundtrack. That's the way that the Bach 2-part inventions are. I mean, and like, obviously Bach took that limitation as a challenge to write some really brilliant music.
Right, yeah.
So if that challenge is there, then that means that you can excel in it. And yeah, that's what we got.
Yeah, and I'll go off, I'm going to go off on a tangent and a little bit here. But, you see this in nearly all forms of art. But I think especially in poetry is that, people used to write in a specific form.
Yeah.
Like a sonnet, which has specific rhymes and specific number of lines and specific syllables.
Yeah. Meter and rhyme scheme and all that.
Yeah.
It was limiting, right?
Yeah.
You got limited, but because the limitation was there, creativity took off and people were writing good stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think a lot of poets, I think a lot of poets believe that like free verse is much more expressive. But having actually written in both, I don't always think so.
Yeah.
It's that, forcing you to consider each and every word very carefully instead of going, oh, okay, my first instinct works. That I think makes for a lot of times much better poetry. And it's one of the things I really like about 8-bit music is these incredible composers that are working in very tight boxes, boxes. And how do you make this music interesting when you've got 3 tracks and they all sound like, some sort of buzzsaw going off in your head?
Yeah. Well, speaking of lbeing limited in creativity, do you want to, I really want to talk about some of the compositional techniques that he uses in the cave theme. Can we listen to that?
Yes, because that song bewilders me.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
All right. And in fact, okay, let's jump to a quick break. When we come back, we're going to listen to the cave theme. Hey, Drum, did you know that the TechnoFunkBoy isn't just a group of podcast hosts that live inside a Super Nintendo?
Really?
That's right, we're also a band.
Tell me more.
We're a retro gaming inspired band that plays covers of classic video game themes, original game music, and other music in the style of classic games.
That sounds great.
Yeah, and you can find our first full-length album on iTunes, Amazon, and CD Baby. It's called The Final Fantasy Mixes, and it's an EDM tribute to some of Uematsu's best musical themes. Check the episode notes for links or go to TechnoFunkBoy to learn more.
TechnoFunkBoy sounds like the greatest band that has ever existed.
I programmed him to say that.
We're back.
welcome back. I'm not your host.
That was my line. I was distracted. It's fair. It's fair.
I said I'm not your host. I'm some fool that he invited into the studio.
Oh goodness. So yeah, of the three tunes, I actually had the most fun with this one.
Yeah.
It took me the longest, but it was like the one that I had a really clear vision on. And I think just, measure wise, this is the shortest.
Yeah, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is 6 measures long.
6 measures long.
It's 6 measures long, which, your average symphony, just for consideration, is thousands of measures long, of course, like multiple movements, and it's 40 minutes. And this stupid little thing is probably a great 7 seconds or something like that. All right, so the reason that this is so creepy and claustrophobic actually has to do with this interval that he's using. And so there's an interval that you'll recognize that's a perfect fifth. And it just sounds open and very, very consonant. Sounds stable. But then if you move the top note down a half step, you get this interval called a tritone, which for a long time was called El Diablo en Musica, or the Devil in Music, and it was outlawed by the Catholic Church during, Gregorian chant times because it was so dissonant and nasty sounding.
Is that true? Because I watched this.
I
watched this video from Adam. Okay, we're gonna put the Adam Neely video in here, but
yeah, please.
You introduced me to Adam Neely, so this is your fault that I'm going to contradict you. But he says you're full of it.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, it's widely been considered like an extremely dissonant interval. Yeah. And so normal chords, major chords, and minor chords use that open fifth, the perfect fifth.
Sure.
But diminished chords use a tritone. And if you use a diminished seventh chord, it's actually 2 tritones. And this entire tune is based on diminished chords. This entire tune, there's like one measure where he plays a minor chord, but the rest of the time it's just this going on, and then when he decides to change chords, all he does is he moves it down a half step.
Yep.
And so you've got these 2 chords that are right next to each other, and then when you get to that really funky trill part at the end, basically what that is, it's 2 tritones.
Yeah.
And then he moves it down a half step.
Yes.
So this entire tune is diminished chords, which is built on a tritone, or, wait for it, just tritones.
Right.
And so you get this dissonant interval, and it just constantly comes at you, and it never really resolves.
Yeah.
And so you're in a cave, you're underground, and it's really super claustrophobic, and it's tense, and it's dissonant, and it's not resolved.
Yeah, yeah. Koji Kondo uses the same, not the same, but a similar technique in, I think it was the Death Mountain track in Zelda, where the all of the harmonies are just tritones.
Yeah. Those are parallel tritones. Yeah, that's the theme.
Exactly, that's
Those are parallel tritones.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I have not told you this, but when I was arranging the TechnoFunkBoy's version, I was watching the 8-bit music theory guy talk about the Death Mountain theme.
Oh, cool.
And so I was trying to kind of incorporate a couple of those techniques, and so I actually added tritones to the song.
Yeah,
and,
that's right.
But another thing that they do in the Death Mountain thing is the way he composes it. It's really hard to nail down the time signature on it, because he's kind of bouncing around with the melody a little bit.
Yeah.
And we'll get to the TechnoFunkBoy version, but I really like that idea. I'm doing it in a different way, but I really like that idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we've talked about this. Dragon Warrior has the most claustrophobic dungeons in the history of video gaming.
Yeah.
The corridors are so tight, your torch does almost nothing for you. It's like, you can, and for those who haven't played it, it's like, okay, your character's on one space and you can see the 8 spaces immediately around you, and that's it. And so
that's if you have a torch.
If you have a torch,
and
yes.
If you don't have a torch,
you can't see anything.
It's you.
You can see
and a
you.
black screen,
right?
And you're an 11-year-old experiencing your first anxiety attack.
Exactly,
because the monsters down here are way OP, and you have gotten yourself in far too deep.
Right. Oh, and they don't. I mean, the game does give you a little bit of tutorial. The first cave you go into has 0 monsters.
Yeah.
But it is a maze.
Right.
And when you can only see the spaces that you are touching, and that's it, like there can be a dead end that is 1 space deep, and that's it, and you will still fall for it because you can't see the second space to know it's a dead end.
That's right. Yeah.
And so it has this magnificent feel to it, this claustrophobic feel to it that I don't think has been replicated in any game I've played. It's really kind of neat the way they did that.
Yeah.
And once you get the radiant spell,
oh yeah,
where you can see like four levels around you. Oh, it's
so
like,
relieving.
Oh, so this is what this looks like.
Yeah.
So when you were playing it, because you played it as the first time as an adult.
Yeah, that's right.
And
I played it a little bit as a kid, but not really, and I played it for real as an adult.
So did you figure out how to get through the swamp cave without a torch?
Through the swamp cave? Yeah, eventually I did.
Yeah. That's like the pattern that every kid memorizes.
It's like down, over, down, over, down, 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 over, go left.
Right, exactly. And I remember I didn't realize at the time like every single person who ever played it did this, but I was looking at Nintendo Power's map of the dungeon because I didn't want to use any more torches.
Yeah, right.
I didn't want to carry these things around. I have limited inventory.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute, I can go down, then right, and just listen for the bump.
Yeah.
Down, right, down, I think left at that point. And then you can do the same way the other way.
Yeah, just
it's
backwards. Yeah, that's right.
If you hear the bump, you've done it right.
Yeah.
And so that was always fun. But yeah, you can get lost in those very easily. And there's been a number of people who've gotten lost, especially in the swamp cave, and just happen upon that green dragon.
There it is.
And then just get totally destroyed because they're way under leveled at that point. Because you can see that green dragon when you're way too weak.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, but yeah, so yeah, it's a pretty, and it should be stated that, every time you go down a level in the game itself, now we don't play with this, but when you go down a level in the game itself, the melody just repeats at like a step lower, and it just keeps going down.
Yeah.
And more bass and more bass and more bass until you're at the bottom possible level.
Right.
Which I think the lowest level in the game is the Dragon Lord's,
the layer
chamber.
at the very, very bottom of that castle. Yeah.
But by that time, that song is played very deep.
It's notes only whales can hear.
But yeah, once again, we see, 2 tracks, 6 measures, very limited space.
Perfectly evocative.
Yeah.
Like, you know exactly where you're at. And
right.
you just really nervous whenever you're in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. So, okay, let's play the TechnoFunkBoy version of this, pretty quickly. And, you're going to notice some things when you're hearing it. We took some liberties with this song, but I think there was a lot of fun. And we will be right back. So we are back. So, I said, that this took us the longest out of all of them, but
there's a lot of stuff going on in here.
Yeah. And I was really trying to, going back to Koji Kondo's, Death Mountain theme, where you're really playing with the time signature. And there's a distinct time signature to the song, but it's really hard to pick out because all the instruments are playing kind of at their own pace.
You got different, each instrument's got a slightly different pace to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it starts off, and it doesn't help because it starts off with really, really long sustained notes.
Right.
And then when it changes, when the notes change, and you're like, a point from which that I can determine the tempo.
Yeah.
The time signature changes.
Yeah.
It was in 4/4 before that, and then it goes to 5/4.
Huh.
And then as instruments add, some of them are coming in at like 6/8 time, some of them in 5/4 time. And the whole point of it is to just kind of surround you with that kind of claustrophobic feel.
It just
where
it obscures everything,
Yeah,
so you can't really tell which way is up, and that's what being in a dungeon is like.
Yeah. And then at kind of the height of the song, it stops suddenly, and all of a sudden you do get a very distinct beat and melody, and everything comes into line. And kind of what I was thinking about here is I wanted kind of to replicate that feeling that you got when you were wandering around, like specifically the swamp cave, and you're lost, and you're getting deeper in it. You have no idea where the exit is. And then at that moment, the green dragon arrives.
Yeah.
And that's the feeling that I wanted to get. And that's when the beat finally drops into 4/4. Everything's on the same page, and you suddenly realize what's going on.
And you're standing there with a wooden sword and Erdrick's socks.
Erdrick's socks.
That's all you got.
Do not get wet in the swamp.
Plus 0.5 defense.
Oh, so yeah, so that, I really like what we did with this song because it took some time, but it was, we did have kind of that very distinct vision of what we were trying to convey in the song. And it was a lot of fun to figure out how all the pieces would fit into that.
And I like the parallel tritones.
So, we should jump to, so Cave gave me we spent the most time on the cave.
Yeah.
The battle gave me the most trouble.
Yep. Because these chords don't make any sense.
Right. And I'll tell you, the only reason I wanted to do the battle is because, the overworld theme it has a fun beat to it, but it's not necessarily upbeat. It's just, I guess it's a little upbeat, but sure. I wanted something you could dance to. That's kind of what we do.
Yeah.
And so I was digging through, and it's like, okay, so what are the really upbeat tunes in this? And I started playing with the battle theme in my head, and I had it rattling around in my head for days until I came up with a bass line, and then everything fell into place at that point. But let's listen to the original battle theme, and you can explain what in the world he's doing in this song, because again, I don't know. All right, we're back. Explain.
I can't. I mean, quite literally, I can't. It's okay. So the version of the sheet music that I've got in front of me, the best that I could tell you is that he's using the technique of sequencing, where he plays the same thing and then just changes key. And that sort of, you feel that layered approach. He's also oscillating or going back and forth between half diminished chords and fully diminished chords, which are two, like I said about the diminished chords earlier, they're just really super dissonant. They're also really obscure. Like, they don't really exist naturally in major or minor keys. Every now and then you'll find one, you'll stumble across one. So he's using chords that are really obscure, and they don't fit into keys. And then, the best thing that I can say that sort of ties the whole thing together is that you have in each chord one note that when it moves to the next chord goes down a half step or goes down a whole step. And so there's this constant cascade. You can, if you have the notes written out, you can follow how a note will move from chord to chord, just going down by bit, by bit, by bit, by bit, by bit. And it'll just continually do that. And it might jump up an octave, but like if it moves from a low C to a high C, then it's just going to keep on going down after that.
Right.
So beyond that, it is obeying none of the laws of musical physics.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of times the melody is just
Half steps.
it's just walking down half steps.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was one of the real struggles with it, is just trying to actually figure out and place it into a key that we could riff off of.
Right. I mean, like, as it gets on further and further, and this one is, let me count, if you don't count the introduction, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 measures long.
Yeah.
10 measures, people. It's 11 if you count that little introduction.
Sure.
But, as it gets towards the bottom of that, like measures 8 and 9, it starts doing chords that are a little bit more recognizable. But then you just get that, descending little line that happens in there, and it spits you back around to the very beginning of it.
Right, yeah.
So, and that's just chromaticism. It just plays two notes, and then it moves it down a half step, and does it again and again and again. It's very mathematical.
Yeah. And I'd say, in the presentation of it itself is a lot of times one of the reasons that people use that triangle wave.
Yeah.
And, for those who are interested, I might as well state this, that, you've probably seen a waveform when it comes to sound. It's normally like in that sine wave.
Yeah, right.
That just goes kind of up and down. Square waves and triangle waves, like, literally make squares and triangles out of that. And so that's where those sounds come from. And they sound very electronic, very industrial,
unique.
because they are.
Yeah, you're right.
And so, but the triangle wave, does not have quite the pop of a square wave. It has more, kind of a fade in instead of an immediate, abrupt.
Like the attack, you mean?
Yeah, the attack.
Sure.
And so when he is playing really staccato notes, with a triangle wave, it really kind of obscures exactly what he's playing.
Yeah.
And we both have seen now several
different versions of people trying to
figure out what he's playing.
Transcribe it and write it down. And I'm looking at this and listening to it going, this is not quite right. And
yeah.
I mean, if I put aside an hour or two, I could probably figure out exactly what everything is. But
I should have asked you to do that before we tried to arrange it.
I love you. I love you, man, but I would not have done that. No, it's like, it's pretty involved. The problem with transcribing something like this is that it's really unpredictable.
Yeah.
Because he's not using chords that are usual. So you've got to let your ear guide you all the way through. And if you're really good at transcribing, which I'm not, you can tackle those things.
Yeah.
Like, I heard, okay, there's a diminished quality to pretty much this whole song. But that's as precise as I got.
Right, yeah.
Like, I didn't get more specific. Oh, there's an A half diminished chord, and there's a B fully diminished, and then he moves to, I wasn't hearing any of that.
Yeah, and when we were arranging it, it was like I was collecting sheet music of this thing. I was downloading MIDI files because you can put MIDI files into a notation program.
Yeah.
Pull it up. I was downloading the actual sheet music that people were notating online. I was watching YouTube videos of it, and everybody was doing something different because I was trying to figure out what we were going to play for this song.
Yeah.
It's like I had the bass line.
Yeah.
And the bass line is what's uniting our entire version of the song, because otherwise it's really kind of just, I mean, it's really random.
It's soupy. Yeah, no, for sure. And the bass line, like, you get this pedal tone, right? And it's just a continual thing that gives you a sense of key.
Yeah.
And then the chords are still there, and so you can still hear that it's reference to the original from the game.
Yeah.
So you can hear those chords going on, but now there's this sort of like harmonic foundation that
Yeah.
allows you to play over the top of it. And that's
Right.
actually one of the things that I liked about the solo.
Mhm.
Have we heard this version yet?
No. We're going to jump on it.
Okay. So when you do hear it,
That way to pay attention to the show, Dan.
we've talked about so much music. It's the middle of the night. What do you want from me? Well, one of the things that I really liked is that when you've got the guitar solo going, it's basically using a pentatonic scale,
Yeah.
essentially. And so it's in a mode which is really consonant and very stable and very recognizable. But then underneath it is super chromatic,
Yeah.
super unstable, super unrecognizable. And so it actually makes this really cool sort of juxtaposition. Like, underneath that harmonic structure is really out there, but then the solo itself is really tangible.
Yeah.
I like that.
Let's listen to that real quick, and then we'll come right back and chat about it. Okay, yeah. So that's one thing that when we were playing with this, that because the first thing we did was, okay, let's figure out specifically, Morel was playing those long sustained chords, and figuring out what she's going to play, which is really reflective of the original song.
Mm-hmm.
But while we were playing with that, that's kind of the conclusion that we came to, is just like, yeah, we could straight up play this in a normal, easy pentatonic scale.
Yeah.
Play a solo in here and bounce between two modes in there.
Yeah.
And that's it. And in that, those weird sustained notes really kind of added depth to what we were playing that we really liked.
Yeah, it provides like momentary dissonance, but then it resolves it. But it resolves by the chord changing.
Yeah.
So the consonance is still there. Like the notes that you're choosing for the guitar solo are consistent with each other. They're stable. But then when you've got those chords underneath you, it goes from stable to not stable, and then it goes back to stable whenever the chords change, and it makes it really colorful.
All right, so very cool. So,
yeah.
Honestly, getting into this, I didn't realize listening to this stuff that it was quite as complicated. Or in a lot of ways simple. It's like, it never occurred to me that he was not using all three channels.
Yeah.
Until I really started digging into it.
I didn't notice it until we started looking at the music, the sheet music itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't notice that it was that short until I looked at the sheet music. And I was like, that can't be it. Because it's one piece of paper. And it's not even the whole piece of paper. Right. And I'm like, look at it. Where's the rest? And I'm like, oh man, this is it. This is all of it.
Yeah. 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 And what made me want to do this was just how much fun the overworld theme has remained for me after 30 years of playing this game?
Yeah, it's like pretty iconic. Like there are a few tunes like, okay, so the Mario overworld theme, right?
Yeah.
Or the Zelda overworld theme, And okay, and other, like, I love Star Tropics. Probably my favorite game. But I don't remember half of the tunes on Star Tropics.
Bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, 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 bum.
Oh yeah, that. Dun, 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 dun,
That's such a good piece. There's not a lot of music in that game.
Yeah.
Okay, and we've hit on this. There actually is a problem with the music in that game.
Really? And
it's specifically the problem that it looks like Dragonware was trying to avoid. They put too much song in. And there's two pieces in the game that it's hard to notice unless you know what you're looking for, but the songs are just slightly too long for it to process, and so on repeat,
you get a glitch.
One of the tracks, like the middle track, cuts out, and then comes back in off beat.
Oh man,
like a half measure behind or something.
Oh my goodness,
and
I gotta check that out. I gotta check that out. Yeah,
and there's a on emulator, somebody went in and fixed that.
Huh.
So you can get the full song. And it's really sad because one of those two tracks is the ending theme, the closing credits. And so this is the song that they intended to congratulate you for beating this game, and it glitches. And,
that's hilarious.
And thankfully it is the middle track. So,
it's not the melody.
It's not the melody. It's not the bass line.
Yeah.
And so you essentially still have the song there. And like I played that game a lot as a kid, and I never noticed it until somebody pointed it out to me. But,
yeah, well, I mean,
we'll throw that video in the show notes. This is going to be the biggest show
ever.
Gelock just keeps talking about stuff.
No, Dragon Warrior, it just, like I said, like some of the other stuff, the music is iconic.
Yeah.
It's really evocative. It's really simple. And that's what makes it so successful. Like they just said, all right, you got 5 seconds. You have to make something quality in 5 seconds.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. It's, something was going on in the 80s in Japan that these, the video game companies decided they really needed to put major effort into the soundtracks.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad they did.
Yeah.
Because we
this could have been crap.
Oh, yeah.
Really easily, it could have been crap.
Yes.
Like, hey, we got to put some music, and so they get somebody that is like boop 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 boop. Like, repeat that. Give me a paycheck.
I only used one track. This is great.
All right, I'm not going to do it
Yeah.
anymore. The synthesizer
there-
is too much fun, man.
Oh goodness, I know. Tell me about it. And there are games like that like only have like 2 songs in the entire game,
Yeah.
and they're terrible.
You were just phoning it in real
Right.
hard. Yeah.
But you know, someone over at NX was like, hey, you know, this major experiment that has never been tried before, that Yuji Horii decided that he wanted to take, you know, American games from Apple computers that no one bought
Yeah.
and bring them to Japan.
Yeah.
Let's make some majorly good music for it.
I'm kind of wondering if somebody just walked in one day and said, hey, guys, here's an idea. Why don't we just take some pride in our work? Just a thought.
Yeah, very good. Like I said, technofunkboy.com/38. We're going to put apparently a lot of videos on there.
All sorts of videos.
So for stuff that is coming up, first of all, I do want to kind of point the direction of our Patreon page, patreon.com/technofunkboy. Just for basically for the summer, through the end of August, if anybody who signs up for our $3 a month tier or higher is going to get a Dragon Warrior slime perler, made by hand here at the TechnoFunkBoy Studios. We don't actually have a name for these studios, so I just made up one. But we will be sending that out to you. So please do check that out. But next week, we will not be talking about Dragon Warrior.
What?
I know. It's like,
What? You have to change the name of the podcast.
yeah, we were drifting towards, you know, the retro Dragon Warrior.
This
Super
is just the Dragon Warrior podcast. All Dragon Warrior every week.
Oh, that would be. Actually, I'm still not sick of it, so I could probably do it. Oh goodness! Well, thank you so much for joining us again, and do get onto our website, and we will be back next week with a different topic. We will see you then.
The Retro Zoo Super Show is brought to you by the TechnoFunkBoy. Follow us on Twitter at TechnoFunkBoy, on Facebook at the TechnoFunkBoy, and sign up for our email list at TechnoFunkBoy.com. Also look for us on Spotify, iTunes, and Amazon for music. If you are so inclined, please leave us a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast catcher. If you are not so inclined, you are obviously some sort of villain trying to conquer the world. Unowned music and gameplay clips are used for educational and critical purposes. Thank you for listening. Keep gaming. And once you have responsibilities that need to be done at this time, then you can game later.